How did the British steal the Ankara Angora goat? The secret to the immense economic power that quickly transformed the Ottoman Empire from a tribe into a state and then an empire lies in the wool of an ordinary animal, the Angora goat. Mohair is the name given to the wool of this goat. This fiber, which is as lustrous as silk, as soft as feather, and holds dye exceptionally well, has been considered one of the world's most valuable textile raw materials throughout history. The Turks wove fabrics from this wool known as saf or mohair. The fame of this fabric spread from Ankara to the whole world. Europe pronounced Ankara as Angora in their own languages. Therefore, the Angora goat began to be known as the Angora goat in Western languages. Today, when Angora is mentioned in the world, the first things that come to mind are still that softness, that shine, and that delicacy. Moreover, most people no longer even think about the word's connection to the city. Angora is used like an ordinary brand name or textile term. But the history of Ankara lies within that word. What made this goat truly valuable wasn't just the quality of its wool. The Ankara Angora goat could only produce mohair of that quality in Ankara and its surrounding areas. When taken to a different climate or soil, the quality of the fur deteriorates, and that silky shine fades. Evliya Çelebi wrote the following about Ankara in the 1640s. This is the place for mohair fabric. And this fabric is unique to Ankara. It is not possible to produce it anywhere else on earth. The job of everyone, men and women alike, is to weave mohair fabric. The French wanted to take these Ankara goats to France, spin soft yarn from them, and weave mohair fabric, but what they wove wouldn't be soft. They even suggested taking spun yarn from Ankara to France and making mohair fabric, but that didn't work out either. The French traveler Joseph Pitton Tournefort also wrote the following in 1701. At that time, there were 1,355 mohair looms operating in Ankara, Zir, Kankiri, Beypazari, Nallihan, and Kalesik alone, and over 20,000 bolts of fabric were exported annually. This figure was concrete evidence that a small Anatolian city was competing on par with Europe's major textile centers. Mohair fabric was the backbone of the Ottoman economy. The demand for this fabric, which was sold throughout Europe, especially to England and the Netherlands, as well as to Arab countries, was so great that there came a time when production in Anatolia could not meet the demand. The history of mohair production in Anatolia dates back to the 1220s. While Mongol armies were ravaging Central Asia during those years, Suleiman Shah, the leader of the Kayi tribe, took his people in herds and moved westward. The herds of Angora goats he brought with him were the most valuable cargo of this forced migration. When Suleiman Shah died in 1229, his sons had settled in the vast plains stretching from Kayseri to Ankara. The Angora goat arrived in these lands with the Ottoman dynasty. During the 14th and 15th centuries, Ankara became a world textile center. Men and women alike earned their living from this craft. The spinning wheels turned day and night, and the looms clattered. In addition to mohair and woolen fabrics woven from Angora wool, cotton textiles known as bogassi, silk velvets, and fabrics known as Janissary cloth in the 15th century were also among the Ottoman export items. The Ottoman sultans were aware of this economic power and took decisive measures to protect it. The export of raw mohair was banned by decree. The sale of breeding goats was subject to severe penalties. Only processed, woven products, whose value was created in Anatolia, would be sold to Europe. The sending of a pair of Angora goats to the Holy Roman Empire as a dynastic gift in 1554 was an indication of the value placed on this animal. The Ottoman Empire, by controlling the raw materials, accumulated all the added value in its treasury, while keeping Europe in the position of a mere consumer. Europe has tried every means to break this monopoly for decades. But the Ottomans' forbidden wall and nature itself repelled every attempt. In 1740, Sweden was prevented from obtaining breeding goats. In 1771, an attempt was made to establish an Angora goat farm in the Palatinate region of southwestern Germany. However, the goats could not adapt to the climate, and the farm closed. In 1778, the Venetians suffered the same fate. The result was the same in every attempt. This goat couldn't be raised in a different climate. Then the British made a different move. They secretly smuggled 12 male goats and 1 female goat out of Ottoman territory. The British had done their research beforehand. They had calculated that the Angora goat could survive in South Africa's climate. Ships crossed continents and reached the African coast. But the farm could not be established. All 12 male goats had been castrated by Ottoman authorities. This was a clear demonstration of the empire's determination and intelligence in maintaining its monopoly. However, this intelligence could not prevent the political chaos into which the empire was plunged. At the beginning of the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire was facing a period of simultaneous internal and external threats. Nationalist movements, fueled by the French Revolution of 1789, were blossoming in the Balkan territories of the empire. The Greek Revolt, which began in the Peloponnese in 1821, spread to Crete. The Ottomans largely suppressed these rebellions in 1825. In 1827, the Russian, British, and French navies attacked the Ottoman fleet at Navarino in a surprise attack without declaring war. "57 Turkish ships were sunk, and 8,000 soldiers were martyred. The Ottoman navy was effectively destroyed." Then, in 1828, Russia officially declared war. Following the war, the London Protocol, signed in 1830, established an independent Greece under the protection of Great Britain, Russia, and France. For the first time since its founding, the Ottoman Empire permanently lost a territory. This external pressure was compounded by an internal rebellion, that of the governor of Egypt, Muhammad Ali Pasha. The Pasha responded with great self-sacrifice to the Ottoman call for help in suppressing the Greek rebellion. He sent his son, Ibrahim Pasha, with his forces to the Peloponnese. In return, the Ottoman Empire would grant the governorship of Syria to Mehmet Ali Pasha. But in the political turmoil created by the Navarino disaster and the loss of Greece, Istanbul forgot this promise. In 1831, Mehmet Ali Pasha took action. The Egyptian army, under the command of his son Ibrahim Pasha, conquered Syria, then spread into Anatolian territory and advanced as far as Izmit. In 1832, Ottoman forces suffered a crushing defeat in Konya. Left with no other option, the Ottoman Empire turned to Russia. The Russian navy entered the strait, and the Egyptian forces were halted. But this assistance came at a heavy price. With the Treaty of İskelesi in 1833, Russia gained de facto influence over the Ottoman Straits. The Ottoman Empire, while trying to escape one threat, had fallen into the arms of another. The empire was reeling from pressure from European powers in the west, the threat from the Egyptian army in the south, and Russian expansionism in the north, while the Industrial Revolution was growing in the shadow of these crises. James Hargreaves invented the spinning machine in 1764. Richard Arkwright developed the water-powered frame in 1769. Edmund Cartwright built the steam-powered weaving loom in 1785. And when these inventions came together, world textile production reached the greatest turning point in its history. British factories could now complete in weeks what would have taken a weaver years to do, producing goods faster and more cheaply. While anti-machine weaver revolts were breaking out in Europe, there was no attempt at mechanization in the Ottoman Empire. Handlooms continued to operate. This technological divide had already ignited the fuse of economic defeat. Treaty of Balta Limanı. Centuries erased with a single stroke. A document was signed in Balta Limanı on August 16, 1838. Its name was the Anglo-Ottoman Trade Agreement. But historians describe this treaty as the document that effectively marked the end of the Ottoman Empire's economic independence. This treaty, which irrevocably undermined Ottoman industry, trade, stability, and order, is one of the deepest turning points in the empire's history. The background to the agreement was as follows. Mehmet Ali Pasha was continuing to grow in power with French support and was restricting the sale of British goods in Egypt and Syria. This situation threatened Britain's trading interests in the Mediterranean. England offered to protect the Ottoman throne from the Pasha. Sultan Mahmud II needed this protection. They sat down at the table, and the Ottomans surrendered their economy to save their throne. The price of the treaty was high. All internal tariffs and trade restrictions on British goods were lifted. British merchants would be able to trade in Ottoman territories with broader rights than local merchants. Thus, the Ottoman market was flooded with cheap English factory-made fabrics. Turkish handlooms couldn't compete at these prices. The spinning wheels across Anatolia stopped working one after another. The craftsmen lost their jobs. The towns became deserted. And that wasn't all. The decrees that prevented the export of raw mohair and breeding goats also became ineffective in the new order created by the treaty. The mohair monopoly that the Ottoman Empire had meticulously protected for centuries had been dissolved between the lines of a treaty. In this respect, the Treaty of Balta Limanı is very similar to the policy implemented by the British in India. There, too, the local textile industry was first crushed by cheap factory goods, and then raw materials flowed freely abroad. Just as India's cotton weaving industry collapsed, so too did the Ottoman mohair industry. Following Balta Limanı, British Colonel Henderson arrived in Ankara. His mission was clear: to select the finest breeding Angora goats and transport them to British farms in South Africa. The British had done their research years ago. The South African climate was suitable for the Angora goat. And now there was no legal means left to prevent it. When the news spread to Ankara and its surrounding areas, the region was in an uproar. The number of Turkmen who armed themselves and took action to prevent the British from taking their breeding goats reached tens of thousands. For these people, it wasn't just a matter of an animal. The Angora goat was a symbol of ancestral livelihood, a centuries-old craft, and an identity. To hand over the descendants of the herds that Süleyman Shah brought from Turkestan to foreigners meant to surrender history itself. The Ottoman court was caught between two fires, the anger of the people on one side, and the promise made to England on the other. The army was dispatched to the region by order of the Sultan. The 3-year resistance was brutally suppressed, and the British were given the breeding Angora goats they wanted. To protect themselves from the unceasing rage of the rebels, the British had the goats painted black and brought them to the harbor under the cover of darkness, and the ships set sail for South Africa. By 1856, British herds in South Africa had grown sufficiently large, and the Ottoman monopoly on mohair, which had lasted until 1838, had effectively come to an end. South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand have become the world's new centers for mohair production. Kurulan Orgeton Adi Hersey Özetli Yordu, British Angora Goat Society. Lessons of History: The Truth Beyond Wars. Before suffering military defeats on the battlefield, the Ottoman Empire had fallen behind in science and technology, leading to economic collapse. Unable to utilize steam power in production, Ottoman industry could not compete with cheap foreign factory-made products with expensive, handmade goods, and thus the local spinning wheels came to a standstill. The empire that had held economic dominance over the West for 600 years was defeated at the negotiating table this time. Teaching Ottoman history to our children solely as a history of pitched battles means seeing only half of history. Recounting the economic and scientific achievements of the Ottoman Empire during its rise, how it established and maintained its Mohair monopoly, and how Balta Limanı broke this monopoly, offers a highly concrete lesson for today. Empires crumble not only on battlefields, they also fall in closing factories, stopped spinning wheels, and the hidden meanings of trade treaties. The Ottoman Empire experienced firsthand how exporting raw materials and importing processed goods can cripple an economy. He paid the price himself for dismantling the mechanisms that protected domestic production. It wasn't just the administrators who paid the price. Tens of thousands of Turkmen, thousands of craftsmen whose workshops were shut down, and countless families who lost their livelihoods were also affected. Today, every country that exports raw materials and imports processed products is, in a sense, following in the footsteps of the Ottoman Empire in 1838. Any society that can see the reasons for the Ottoman Empire's collapse beyond military defeats is equipped with a historical consciousness that will enable it to protect itself from falling into the same traps. The spinning wheels stopped in 1838. Telling this story is one of the most important steps we can take to ensure those wheels never stop again.